Imagine being in a situation where trust is everything, but the person you trust the most is the one who will betray you in the most unimaginable way. That's exactly what happens in this story. Picture this: a young man, full of life and ambition, unknowingly walking into a web of manipulation and deceit. He meets a woman who seems to have everything in control: her life, her choices, even her appearance, which is enough to catch anyone's eye. But behind that poised exterior is a plan that will leave him questioning his decisions for years to come. At first, things feel easy. There's chemistry, an undeniable connection that they both think is genuine. The woman, a bit older, experienced, and seemingly wiser, knows exactly how to get what she wants. She's careful, patient, and knows how to play the game. She makes him feel wanted, desired, and loved in ways he's never experienced before. The young man feels like he's found someone special, someone who understands him in a way no one else has. But what he doesn't realize is that she is not in it for love. She has an agenda, and he is just a pawn in her grand plan. Their relationship at first seems innocent enough. There's no rush, no pressure, just a natural progression. But behind the scenes, the woman is working overtime, making sure everything goes according to her twisted blueprint. She doesn't just want a relationship. She has her sights set on something far more destructive. She knows that for her plan to succeed, she needs to trap him in a way that will force him to stay. And there's one thing, one undeniable bond that she can use as leverage: a child. She gets pregnant. The young man, excited but nervous about becoming a father, doesn't realize that this moment is the first step in his downfall. He assumes that this is just the next chapter of their lives together, but for her, it's the beginning of something far more sinister. The woman sees the pregnancy as a way to tie him down, to make him dependent on her in ways he never expected. But what she doesn't account for is the unpredictability of the young man's response, and how everything she's planned may come crashing down. As time passes, her manipulation deepens. She controls the narrative, plays on his emotions, and keeps him close, but always at a distance. Her words are sweet, but her actions are calculated. What the man doesn't know is that she's been slowly turning him into exactly what she needs: a provider, a captive to her whims, someone who feels obligated and trapped by the life they've created. She has him wrapped around her finger, but there's one twist in her plan that even she didn't foresee. While she thinks she's in full control, the young man begins to pick up on the signs. Little things start to feel off, like his every move being scrutinized, his choices being manipulated. He begins to feel the weight of her plans pressing down on him, but he can't quite figure out the full extent of what she's done. As his life starts spiraling out of control, the woman's true motives begin to surface. This isn't just about a relationship or a child. It's about power, control, and revenge. As the story unfolds, you'll discover just how far she's willing to go to get what she wants. And when the young man starts piecing everything together, the shocking twist will leave you speechless. The real question is, can he escape the grip of someone who has spent so much time and effort to destroy his life, or is he doomed to live with the consequences of her actions forever? Stay tuned, because the next chapter of this story will leave you questioning the true cost of trust, love, and the price of manipulation. As the days go by, things start to feel different for him. The connection that once felt so effortless now feels suffocating. Every time they're together, it's as if there's a heavy weight in the air. She's always there, watching him, waiting for him to do something. But what exactly is she waiting for? At first, he brushes it off, thinking maybe it's just the stress of impending fatherhood. But the more he tries to focus on the future, the more he feels like he's being pulled in a direction he doesn't want to go. There were moments when everything seemed perfect. He remembers the first time they met, how easy it was to talk to her. She seemed to understand him in a way that no one else did. She made him feel seen, important, and for a guy like him who had always struggled with self-doubt, that felt like a rare treasure. In her, He thought he'd found someone who genuinely cared. But now, as the weeks go by, he starts to question whether it was all just an illusion, carefully crafted for her own gain. She was always just a little too perfect. The way she smiled, the way she listened intently when he spoke, and the way she seemed to know exactly what to say at the right moment. Her charm was undeniable. But charm can only mask so much, and now he was starting to see through it. The little things she said, the way she acted, started to feel less like affection and more like manipulation. It wasn't obvious at first, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that she was always one step ahead of him. As time went on, her control over him grew. She had a way of making him feel guilty for the smallest things. If he wanted to go out with his friends, she'd act distant, making him feel like he was abandoning her. If he spent too much time on his career or personal goals, she'd make him feel selfish, as though he was neglecting his responsibilities. She made it clear, without saying a word, that his life now revolved around her. And by extension, the life they were about to create together. But it wasn't just about the pregnancy. He soon realized that she was using the baby to keep him tied to her. But there was something else, something darker. The more he dug into her past, the more he started to uncover inconsistencies, small details that didn't quite add up. Why was she so secretive about her previous relationships? Why did she seem so guarded about her past? He tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just her personal business, but his curiosity got the better of him. And when he started asking the right questions, that's when the cracks in her carefully constructed persona began to show. One day, while going through some old messages on his phone, he found something that made his stomach drop. It wasn't much, just a few texts, but it was enough to make him stop and think. The texts were from a man he didn't recognize, someone she had been in contact with long before they met. There were no details, just brief exchanges that left him with a sinking feeling in his gut. Was this man part of her plan all along? Did she have a history of manipulating people like this? He couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than he was being shown. It wasn't just the texts. There were other signs too. The way she seemed to have all the answers when he needed them, always pushing him in certain directions, always making him second-guess himself. He was starting to feel like a puppet on a string, and she was the one pulling all the strings. But he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not with the baby on the way. The pressure kept building. Every day, it seemed like there was another expectation, another demand. She wanted him to focus on providing, on securing their future, but every time he tried, it felt like he was walking in circles. The more he tried to build something stable, the more she seemed to complicate things. It was almost as if she was pushing him to the brink, making him question whether he could ever truly escape her influence. And then things took a turn for the worse. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation, she dropped a bombshell. "You know, it's not just the baby I'm relying on," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "I've made sure you're part of this for good, whether you like it or not." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She had been so sweet, so loving. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about control, about making sure that no matter what, he would never escape her grasp. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to walk away, to pack up and leave everything behind. But the other part, the part that cared about the child they were about to bring into the world, couldn't. He couldn't just turn his back on everything, especially not on a baby that hadn't even been born yet. But what if everything she told him, everything she'd shown him, was nothing but a lie? What if the love he felt for her was just another part of the trap? As the days passed, he started to feel more and more trapped in a life he didn't want. Every time he tried to take control of his own future, she was there, subtly guiding him in the direction she wanted. It was as if his every move was being watched, his every decision being influenced by her. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think straight. It was like he was stuck in a dream where he couldn't wake up, and the woman he thought he knew so well was turning into someone he barely recognized. And yet, every time he thought about leaving, about finding a way out, he came back to the same question. What about the baby? Was he just going to walk away and leave it all behind? He couldn't do that. But staying with her felt like it was slowly killing him from the inside out. He had to know more. He had to find out what she was really planning. There was something bigger at play here, something he hadn't yet uncovered. He decided to start looking deeper, to find answers that she had kept hidden from him. And what he discovered next would shake him to his core. Late one night, while she was asleep, he went through her personal things, looking for anything that could help him understand who she really was. It didn't take long for him to find a set of papers hidden in a drawer. Documents that told a story he wasn't ready to hear. They weren't about the baby or their future, but about her past. A past filled with broken relationships, failed marriages, and something far darker. The papers were old, worn, and filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. She had done this before. She had trapped someone else in the same way, using the same tactics, the same charm, the same promises of love. And just like before, it had ended in heartbreak and destruction. He couldn't believe it. The woman he thought he was building a life with had already done this to someone else. And worse, it seemed like she was planning to do it again. Suddenly, the weight of everything hit him. He wasn't just stuck in a bad situation. He was caught in a cycle, a pattern that she had carefully crafted over time. She wasn't just trying to manipulate him. She was trying to destroy him, piece by piece, just like she had done with others before him. And the worst part, he still didn't know how to get out. His mind raced as he stared at the papers, the weight of the discovery settling over him like a suffocating fog. The documents in front of him weren't just some forgotten pieces of the past. They were proof of the nightmare he'd stepped into. She had done this before, trapped someone just like him in her web of lies and deceit, and now he was next. His pulse quickened as the reality of what he was facing began to sink in. He had to act fast, but what could he do? She was always one step ahead, and he was running out of time. His hand trembled as he carefully placed the papers back in the drawer. He couldn't let her see him like this. He needed to think, to plan, but all he could hear in his head was the echo of her words. "I've made sure you're part of this for good." The trap had already been set, and now he was stuck in it, unable to move without her pulling the strings. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The baby, the child that was coming into the world, that was his only reason for staying. He couldn't walk away from a child that needed him, no matter what it meant for his own future. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he wasn't just trapped by the pregnancy. It was everything she had done to him. The emotional manipulation, the control, the isolation. It had all been carefully orchestrated to break him down. And now, with the baby coming, he was more vulnerable than ever. But he couldn't stay in this toxic relationship. It was clear that her plan was working, that she had him exactly where she wanted him. He wasn't even sure he knew who she really was anymore. The woman he thought he had fallen in love with was a stranger, someone who had carefully crafted an illusion of love to make him believe he was the one in control. But the truth was, she had always been in control. And if he didn't act now, he'd lose everything: his dignity, his freedom, and the life he wanted to build. The night stretched on, and sleep refused to come. He kept replaying everything in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. The subtle signs, the things he had missed in the beginning, the way she had manipulated every aspect of his life. It was like looking back at a puzzle where every piece fit perfectly into place, except now he could see the bigger picture, and it was terrifying. The next day, he knew he had to confront her, but how could he confront someone who had been playing this game for so long? What could he say that would make her slip up, reveal her true intentions? He had no idea what she was capable of, and the thought of being in her presence, knowing what he knew, made him feel exposed, vulnerable. He decided to take a risk. He would try to provoke a reaction, see if he could catch her off guard, see if she would let something slip. He spent the day pretending everything was normal, smiling through the tension, keeping up the facade. When he finally sat down with her that evening, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. She sat across from him, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. She had no idea that he knew the truth, that he knew what she had been planning all along. "You've been distant," she said, her voice low but smooth. "What's on your mind?" He almost didn't recognize the tone. It was the same as always, soft and caring. But now it felt like a trap. He could sense the manipulation beneath her words, the subtle pressure she was applying, as if she were waiting for him to crack. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this. The baby, the life we're building. It's a lot." She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a smile. "You're nervous, that's all. It's natural. But we'll figure it out together, just like we always do." Her words were reassuring, but they felt empty, hollow. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of everything he had discovered held him back. He had to keep pushing, had to get her to show her true colors. "But what about everything else? The way you've been, pushing me, controlling everything. It feels like I don't have a say in anything anymore." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and he could see the shift in her demeanor. The calm, loving facade was slipping, revealing the woman beneath who had orchestrated everything from the start. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice colder now. "You think you have control, but you never did. I've been in control from the beginning, and that's the way it's always going to be. You can't escape it now." His breath caught in his throat. The coldness in her voice, the finality of her words, sent a chill down his spine. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. He had been holding on to a hope, a small part of him that still believed things could get better, that maybe he had been overreacting. But hearing her say those words, so matter-of-factly, made everything clear. She had planned this, every last detail, and now there was no turning back. "I'm not the one who's been controlling things," he said, trying to steady his voice, though the anger and fear were threatening to take over. "You've been doing it, from the start, and I'm done." She stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can just leave me and the baby behind? You're not going anywhere. I've already made sure of that." Her words hit him like a punch. He realized that this was it, the final confrontation. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. She had him cornered, and now it was time for him to make a choice. "I won't be your pawn," he said, his voice rising with a new sense of determination. "You can't control me anymore. I won't let you." For a moment, she said nothing. She simply stared at him, her face an unreadable mask. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, unsure of what would come next. The silence that followed was deafening. He had no idea how far she was willing to go to keep him under her thumb. He didn't know if he was strong enough to break free. But one thing was certain. He was done being manipulated. The battle for his future was far from over, and now, more than ever, he had to find a way out before it was too late. As the door clicked shut behind her, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with the tension that now seemed to surround them both. She had left him standing there, alone with his thoughts, and for a moment, he thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the last he would see of her. Maybe she had finally realized that her plan was falling apart, that the hold she had on him was slipping. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For hours, he paced the apartment, his mind racing. The weight of the conversation hung over him like a cloud, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't just fighting to protect his future. He was fighting for his very freedom. If he didn't do something soon, if he didn't find a way to break away, he would be trapped forever in the web she had so carefully spun. The baby, her manipulations, the control, everything was building towards something that he couldn't even begin to predict. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. And as the night dragged on, he could feel the pressure mounting. He tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, images of her flashed in his mind. Her smile, her touch, the way she had once made him feel like he was the center of her world. But now, all of it seemed tainted, distorted by the dark reality of what she had planned. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that her manipulation wasn't just about the baby. She wasn't just trying to trap him into a life he didn't want. She was trying to ruin him, destroy everything he had worked for, everything he held dear. And what was worse, he realized, was that she wasn't alone in this. There had been a moment earlier, in the midst of their heated conversation, when he had seen something in her eyes, a flicker of something cold and calculating. It was almost as if she had been waiting for him to say those very words, to challenge her control. And that's when it hit him. The papers he had found, the ones that revealed her past, weren't just a history of failed relationships and manipulative behavior. They were part of a larger pattern, a blueprint that she had used on others before him. But what if she hadn't been acting alone? What if there were others, people who had helped her in the shadows, people who were part of her plan all along? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just her. There was someone else pulling the strings. He could feel it now, the weight of unseen eyes, the sense that there was something just beneath the surface, something he hadn't been able to see until now. And if that was true, then what had seemed like an isolated incident was actually part of something much bigger. He wasn't just caught in the grip of a manipulative woman. He was caught in the middle of something far darker, something that stretched beyond just him and her. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't the only target. He wasn't the first, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. She had done this before, and she would do it again if he didn't act fast. He needed to find out who else was involved, who was helping her. But the problem was, he had no idea where to start. Every person in her life, every detail of her past, had been carefully hidden from him. She had built this life around lies, around a facade that he had been too blind to see. Just as he was beginning to spiral into panic, there was a knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. Was it her, coming back to finish what they had started? Was she here to confront him, to finish the conversation she had started earlier? Or was it someone else, someone he hadn't even considered yet? He opened the door cautiously, his mind racing. And there, standing in front of him, was someone he didn't recognize, a tall man, dressed in a suit with a stern expression on his face. The man's eyes scanned him for a moment before he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I need to talk to you," the man said. "About her." His pulse quickened. "What do you mean? About who?" "About the woman you're involved with," the man replied, his eyes never leaving his. "I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you're dealing with." A rush of adrenaline surged through him. Could this be the person behind the scenes, the one he had been sensing? Was this the other piece of the puzzle? Or was he just another part of her plan, another layer of manipulation designed to keep him off balance? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky despite his attempt to stay calm. "I'm someone who's seen this before," the man said, his gaze softening slightly. "I've seen what she does, how she manipulates people. I've seen the destruction she leaves behind." The words hit him like a wave. Could this man be telling the truth? Was he really trying to help him, or was this just another ploy to keep him under control? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, still trying to make sense of the situation. She's just pregnant. I don't know what's going on, but she's trying to control me. She's been manipulating me for weeks." The man shook his head slowly, his expression darkening. "It's not just about you. It never was. She's been doing this for years, to people just like you. And if you don't stop her now, if you don't get out of this before it's too late, she'll destroy you. She'll destroy everything you have." His mind spun, and for a moment, he felt as though the ground beneath him was giving way. Could this be real? Was there someone out there who had seen through her before? Was this his chance to finally escape, to expose her for who she truly was? "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" "I'm not here to hurt you," the man replied, his voice low. "I'm here to give you a warning. If you want to save yourself, if you want to protect the life you've built, you need to act fast. But understand this, she's not going to let you go. Not without a fight." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, all he could do was stare at the man, trying to make sense of it all. It was like the ground had shifted beneath his feet, and the world as he knew it was starting to unravel. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes never leaving him. "I'm someone who knows exactly what you're up against, and if you want out, if you want to escape her grip, you have to trust me." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the young man standing alone, his mind spinning. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The woman who had been playing with his life wasn't just a master manipulator. She was part of something bigger, something far more dangerous. And if he didn't find a way to stop her now, he would be caught in her web forever. The man's words echoed in his mind long after the door closed behind him. "You have to act fast." What did that even mean? He had already been running in circles, trying to understand the depth of what was happening. But now, with the truth of her manipulations crashing down on him, he realized how far gone he truly was. The web she had spun was tangled, and he was right in the center of it. It was time to make his move, time to break free. But would it be enough? For the next few days, he kept his distance, observing her every move. She didn't seem to notice anything different, her routine unchanged, but there was an underlying tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. He knew something had to change. The more he stewed over what the man had said, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't about her manipulating him to get what she wanted. This was about control. Control over everything he had, everything he stood for. She had planned this from the start. And now he had to figure out how to turn the tables. One evening, he confronted her. He was done pretending. His patience had worn thin, and the stakes were too high. She had lied to him, twisted everything he believed. And now it was time to expose her. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Why manipulate me? What do you want from me?" Her eyes narrowed, the calmness in her expression suddenly slipping. "You're asking the wrong questions," she said, her voice almost too smooth. "You should be asking yourself how you're going to fix this mess you've made." He could feel the weight of her words bearing down on him, but he couldn't let her control the conversation anymore. "You think you can just do whatever you want with me, and then walk away unscathed? No, I won't let you." For a split second, her facade cracked. A flicker of something, fear, anger, flashed across her face, but it was gone almost instantly, replaced with that same cold, calculating look. She stood up and moved toward him slowly, like she was closing in for the kill. "You don't understand, do you?" she said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. "You're not in control here. You never were. The moment you walked into my life, you became part of something much bigger than you. And now, you're stuck. There's no getting out of it." He felt his heart race. The walls were closing in, and he could feel her tightening her grip around him. But he wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "I'm not stuck," he said, his voice firmer now. "You've made mistakes, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Her eyes flicked toward the door, as if calculating her next move. But before she could speak, there was a sudden knock. The interruption startled both of them. She looked at the door, her face unreadable, then back at him. "This isn't over," she whispered, but he saw the faintest tremor in her hand. When he opened the door, he was met with a face he never expected to see. The man from days ago. He looked just as serious, just as stern, but this time there was something different in his expression, something urgent. "We need to talk." "Now," the man said. Confusion flooded his mind. What was this all about? Why had the man returned? Without a word, the man stepped into the apartment, his eyes flicking quickly from him to her, then back to him. The woman tensed immediately, her posture stiffening. She took a step back, her eyes narrowing. "What is this? Who are you?" "You already know who I am," the man said, his voice colder than before. I've been trying to warn him, but I guess some people never listen until it's too late. The tension in the room was palpable. The woman seemed to realize what was happening, and the color drained from her face. Her confident demeanor faltered just slightly. She was losing control. "I told you," the man continued, his eyes locked onto hers. "You can't keep manipulating people like this. You're not going to get away with it anymore." For a moment, there was silence, as if everything had come to a halt. Then the woman's voice broke through, quieter now, almost pleading. "You don't understand. You don't know what he's capable of. He's the one, whoa." She stopped herself, as if realizing that in that one slip of the tongue, she had exposed the final piece of the puzzle. The man stepped forward, cutting her off. "You thought he was the pawn, didn't you? But you've been playing a much bigger game. A game that you've been running for a long time." Everything clicked into place in that moment. The woman, the manipulations, the strange behavior, the man had been right. She wasn't just trying to trap him. She was part of something darker, something far more dangerous. And it wasn't just about him at all. "The baby," he whispered, the realization hitting him hard. The baby was never the real plan. It was about using me, to get to something bigger. The woman's eyes went wide, panic flashing across her face. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You don't know what you're talking about." But it was too late. The man had been telling the truth. The woman had been trying to manipulate him into a much larger scheme, using him as a pawn to reach a goal he couldn't even begin to understand. And now, with everything out in the open, the only question left was how far she would go to keep her secret intact. Before either of them could speak again, there was a sudden crash from the hallway. The door burst open, and two other men stepped inside, their faces grim. The woman gasped as the men advanced toward her, their presence unmistakable. "I knew you wouldn't go down without a fight," the man who had warned him said. "But it's over now. You've been exposed." The woman's face twisted with fury and desperation. "No," she hissed, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. You have no idea what you're interfering with." In that moment, everything fell apart. The man, the woman, the tangled web of lies. Everything came to a head. And as the truth came to light, he realized one thing. This wasn't just about escaping her grip anymore. This was about uncovering the full extent of her plans and stopping them before they could destroy more lives. As the men advanced, the woman stepped back, her eyes flicking from them to him, panic evident on her face. For the first time since he had met her, he saw her vulnerable, her mask slipping away to reveal the truth beneath. She had always been in control, playing her cards with such precision, but now the game was unraveling, and she had no more tricks left. She was trapped, exposed, and there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. You don't know what you're dealing with. This is bigger than you think." But the man who had warned him stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "We understand more than you think, and it's over now. You can't keep manipulating people for your own gain. Not anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words never came. Her shoulders slumped in defeat as she realized that the game was up. The truth had come to light, and there was no going back. She had been using him, and others, like pawns in a dangerous game of manipulation, all for her own twisted agenda. But now that the curtain had been pulled back, there was no hiding from the consequences. The men escorted her out of the apartment, her head hung low. As she was taken away, he watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as the door slammed shut behind them. For a brief moment, he stood there, taking in the silence that followed, trying to process everything that had just unfolded. It was over. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. But even as the weight of the situation began to sink in, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The hold she had on him, the grip of fear and uncertainty, was gone. He was free, free to rebuild his life, to move forward without her looming over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. It wasn't just about escaping her manipulations. It was about taking back control of his life. The man who had helped him, the one who had warned him about the woman's true intentions, approached him once the commotion had died down. "You did well," he said simply. "But remember, this isn't just about you. There are others out there who have fallen victim to her, and they're going to need help too." He nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in. He had been one of the lucky ones, one of the few who had managed to escape before it was too late. But there were others, people who had been trapped in the same web of lies and manipulation. And now, it was his responsibility to make sure they didn't fall into the same trap. "I understand," he said quietly. "I won't let this happen again." As the man left, he stood in the middle of his apartment, looking around at the space that had once been filled with tension, uncertainty, and fear. Now, it was just a place where he could finally start over, where he could begin to heal from the scars of the past. But as he sat down on the couch, his mind began to wander back to everything that had happened. The lies, the manipulation, the way she had used him. It was hard to believe how much he had been blind to, how deeply she had managed to bury her true intentions beneath layers of charm and false affection. He had let her in, trusted her, and believed that what they had was real. And yet it had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated act designed to keep him under her control. He had learned a hard lesson. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. And he knew that he would never make the same mistake again. But beyond that, he had learned something even more important, that the power to break free from manipulation, to take back control of his life, was always within him. It had never been about her or anyone else. It had always been about his own strength, his own ability to fight back when everything seemed lost. The room was silent, but his thoughts were loud. There was so much to process, so much to understand. And as he sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized that the future was full of possibilities. He could rebuild, make new connections, and start over, this time with a clearer sense of who he was and what he wanted from life. The phone on the table buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He picked it up and saw a message from a friend. A simple check-in. "Hey, you doing okay?" It was a reminder that even after everything that had happened, there were people who cared, people who had his back. He hadn't been alone in this. There had always been a support system, people who wanted to see him thrive, and he would never take that for granted again. He smiled slightly as he typed a quick response. "Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks for checking in." As he put the phone down and leaned back against the couch, a sense of calm washed over him. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. He had survived, and now it was time to live. Time to move forward with his life, with his newfound strength, and to remember the lessons he had learned along the way. There would always be challenges, always be people who tried to manipulate and control. But now, he knew that he had the power to stand up to them. He had the power to protect his future, to safeguard his peace, and to never let anyone take that away from him again. And with that, he let out a long, slow breath. The nightmare had ended, but his story had just begun. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that relationship, blind to the manipulations that lay in wait. He was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. And no one, not her, not anyone, could ever take that away from him. The door had closed on that chapter of his life, but now he was ready to open the next one. The future was his, and nothing would stand in his way.